Hi, my name is Carson Sheinberg and today is May 3rd, 2015. I'm sitting here with three wonderful Korean War veterans. We're going to start off with an introduction from all of you, so it would be nice if you could all introduce yourselves and give a little bit about your family background. So we can start with Mark.
My name is Mark Bratter. I was born in Cuba and I came to the United States in August 45. When I graduated high school in 1953, I joined the Army, and from there on, the story will carry on later.
Hi, my name is Joe Heit. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. Everybody was born in Brooklyn.
No, we won't.
And I had just graduated college when the war broke out, the Korean War broke out. And I was drafted.
I'm Marty Smoller. I was born in the Bronx, never finished high school, joined the Marines in January 1950.
We're going to start with my grandfather, Mark Bratter. Can you tell us where you were going to school when the Korean War broke out?
I was in Lincoln High School in Brooklyn, and I graduated in 1953. I tried to get a job and there wasn't much work out there, and I did not apply to any colleges, so I figure I'll join the Army, and if I make it through in 3 years, I will get the GI Bill and attend college after that.
My name is Joe Heit. In 1950, I got my bachelor's degree from Brooklyn College, and I was drafted on November 3rd of 1950.
Actually, a Marine came to my high school and gave us an introduction into the Marine Corps and wanted us to join the reserves, which I thought in those years it was like a Blue Jackets or like a sailors or something, and we go on parade and play with your guns. Unfortunately, while in high school, the war broke out in Vietnam, which wasn't called a war, it was a civil action.
Korea.
And what did I say?
Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't there.
You said Korea.
Anyway, when the civil action broke out in Korea, I was in summer camp in North Carolina. They told me I was activated to go home, get my clothing, and come back. Last thing I knew, I'd come back, and I went first to a boot camp for about 3 weeks of intensive combat training.
2.
Next, they're going to tell me what branch of the military they were in, their unit, rank, and specialty.
I was in the Army, in the Signal Corps. Now, I was specialized in cable splicing, and by the time I got out of the service, I was Specialist 3rd Class, which was a corporal now.
I was stationed in Camp Cook, California, which was the 40th Infantry. It had just been federalized. I achieved the rank of sergeant. I took my basic in Camp Cook, California, and then from there we shipped to Japan, and from Japan to Korea.
I was a corporal in the Marine Corps. I was a trained machine gunner. So 14 months of action.
Back up a little bit.
You're on
please.
video.
I feel really
Go, talk.
violated. Okay. Where did you receive your basic training and when?
I received my basic training in Fort Dix, New Jersey, October 1953.
I did my basic training in Camp Cook, California, 1950.
Where did you leave from and how did you get there?
I left to Korea March of 1954. I left from Fort Lewis, Washington, the state of Washington, and we went on the USS Randolph that took us to Yokohama. They left the people that were going to stay in Japan and Okinawa there, and then they released us and took us to Korea.
I was in Tokyo doing advanced basic, and we left from Tokyo on January 4th by troop ship, and we landed in Korea a few days later.
This is a long tale. Started with a troop transport train from Carolina to California. In California, we went to Treasure Island. We were there for 3-4 days in Treasure Island. We took a seaplane to Hawaii. From Hawaii, we took another plane to Johnson Islands. From Johnson Islands, we took another plane to Saipan. From Saipan to Okinawa. From Okinawa, went to Japan. 3 days later from Japan, we took landing crafts to Incheon Landing in 1950.
While in Korea, were you involved in combat?
No, I wasn't. They sent us there to clean up the mess. There was no poles, no cables, telephone cables, so that was our job, to put it up immediately.
I was a communications sergeant in a line company, and yes, I did see combat. We were on the Kumsung Valley, which was the 38th parallel.
14 months of combat. Never knew where I was or what I did. And I was 17 years old and didn't know from diddly squat. But you learn the hard way.
How long were you stationed in Korea, and when did you return from Korea?
I was stationed in Korea 16 months, 24 days. I boarded a ship back home, which I think was U.S. Walker, on October 8th when the Dodgers won their first World Series.
That's how they celebrated.
I was in Korea from January 8th till August 12th. And I was stationed on the front lines on the 38th parallel.
I got there in October 50. We were there at the heaviest battles of the Chosin Reservoir. And we were there for the 14 months we were combat. We seen villages that were raped, ravaged by the North Koreans, and we pushed them back until we got caught up in the reservoir. We came back. The next big battle we had was another going back up again, and we got hung up in the punch bowl. And we were there for a long time. These are major battles in Korea. And that's where, well, you'll go on further on, you'll find out more.
Prior to your enlistment, did you have knowledge of a war taking place in Korea?
It wasn't a war, and I did have knowledge because my brother was drafted in February and sent over there. That's the reason I knew about Korea.
I didn't know about Korea until the summer when it broke out. And I really didn't care about Korea. It was on the other side of the world. And we're in a police action because the UN took over.
I never even heard of Korea. I didn't know anything about the Mideast whatsoever. I was a naive 17-year-old kid who knew from nothing.
How did they react when they learned that you were going to Korea?
My father never said a word to me, but my mother did tell me a lot of things like, now I got 2 of them. I hope both of you make it home. I will not sleep until I see the 2 of you back.
I wasn't home. I was in Japan when we were notified we were going to Korea. And I wrote them a letter, and I'm sure my mother cried. That I'm sure of.
When I came home from my certain summer camp, I had no idea I was going anywhere. When I came back from leave and they told me I was going to be deployed, I had no idea where I was going to be deployed to. My parents only told me you got to go back to school. They were immigrants. They knew nothing about that side of World War II. They knew nothing about Korea or what I'm going into. In fact, I didn't know where I was going into. I had no idea what was going on until it actually happened.
Arrival, and did you experience nerves?
When I arrived in Korea, it looked like a bomb just blew up the whole town. There was one building that you can see. It was like about 4 flights up, but you only saw 2 walls. There was no windows, just 2 walls still up there. I wasn't really scared because there was a ceasefire, but I really didn't know what that stood for. Ceasefire, was there going to be firing later or what?
What was the question? We were on a troop ship and we were issued live ammunition. And then they hit me. They were going into a war zone. And how did I feel? Was I frightened? Sure I was. I'd be damn fool not to be.
I was too young to be scared. I had no idea what was going on. It was just an awesome experience. When you're getting off a LST, jumping into water and making a landing, and people are firing at you, it was just awesome. I could not believe what was going on. And I wasn't scared because I was too stupid to be scared. When you're young and naive, you don't know what's going on. Later on, you learn what it is, but you're not scared because you got your brothers with you. And your brothers are your fellow servicemen. And they go where you go. And each one protects each other, and that's what we're there for.
Well said.
How were the living conditions at the time you were in Korea?
I wasn't as bad as some of the other ones that got there before me. We had canned food, but once a week we would have eggs. As far as the living condition, we had a hut, so it wasn't bad at all. We had to sleep in sleeping bags, but it was okay. It was better than most of the people had.
We were up on the front lines. We got sea rations, but once a day we got a hot meal brought up by the Korean houseboys, and they carried the equipment to heat up the food. And as far as living, sleeping bag and a rock for a pillow.
It wasn't considered living conditions. For 14 months, we never know what a hot meal was unless I was on a hospital ship. It was strictly sea rations and cold coffee and whatever you can heat up. And we traded our suppers were canned food that we traded each day to get something else, whether it be canned peaches, canned pears, or canned meat. We tried to heat up meals, but there was no meals to heat. We were never in the rear that long to get hot meals.
The weather was horrible. In the cold, we had light jackets. Our gloves were thin. It was like you were dressed for midwinter. And the thing, it used to hit like about -10 where I was. And we had nothing until I went to see my brother, and he was able to get us a parka, what they call Mickey Mouse boots, and the heavy fur gloves and hat. And then I took it back to the company and left it there, and we share it. When whoever went on guard duty took it with them.
We never had the Mickey Mouse boots to start with, and I got frostbite, and I rubbed my feet for 24 hours because Second World War frostbite was excusable. Korea, no. It was a court-martial offense. But I had a good parka and I had a good hat.
In October and November of '50, it was cold. When we got up to Rezo, it was 50 degrees below zero. And most of the time during the fighting, you couldn't wear your parkas because you can't fight with those heavy things on. So we took them off, we carried them, put them on our backpacks. As far as being warm, we didn't know what it was to be warm until the summer months hit.
How much money were you receiving for your services?
Money? I don't really remember, but it wasn't much, maybe $80 a month or something like that. I really do not remember.
As a sergeant, I received $160 a month combat pay, most of it which I sent home.
Never received any money. All the money I ever had just went home.
Did you exchange any letters back and forth with family or friends while you were in Korea?
Yes, I did. My mother used to write me just about every day, and I had a friend of mine that he sent me a letter every week. We kept in touch. And I also got letters from girls that I didn't know who they were, one of the priests got a hold of our names, and these girls were very nice. They sent us letters, and a rabbi in the Ocean Parkway temple also did the same thing. He got a hold of our names, and some of the girls wrote us nice letters. They kept in touch with us, and it was really nice. I tried to answer all the letters.
I must have written to 10 people, and I always had time every day to write my parents. Scared the hell out of them with the things I wrote, but it was great receiving letters.
Very little. Maybe a couple of my teachers, that's all. My mother didn't know how to write, and my siblings were too young. They were 8 and 10 years old. They were just school kids. And a couple of my friends that wrote, but then they went to service order and I never stopped. Maybe I got 2 letters a month, if that.
How was your relationship with the other troops, including foreigners?
We were very close because we actually were watching our backs. Each one took care of the other guys. We also had a small unit of English fighters, and they were up on a mountain, and there was another small unit in another mountain of Marines, and we used to get together and have a couple of drinks. They were a lot of fun. Half of them would get drunk and just fall out there, but we really did have a good time. We were behind the line, so it was okay.
We rarely met any foreign troops. The Royal Koreans were always to our right, and we set up our perimeters like there was nobody there. They were terrible, and got along well with the troops in my company.
We were individuals. We were machine gun outposts. We never got any of the other troops. And every other combat campaign we were in, we were transferred to different companies because we were strictly outposts. And the guys that were within my company, not my company, but my unit, a lot of them were getting wounded and shot up, and we had to be transferred constantly. So I never was with any of the guys for more than maybe 2 months or 3 months. Never got to know anybody. As far as the Rock Army was concerned, they stood with us all the time. They were always on our right flank.
What were some of the most dangerous or difficult moments you encountered while in Korea?
The most dangerous were when we went out on a job to fix cables in the town. And we didn't really know what was going on because it was nighttime and we just had one floodlight just there and you didn't know who was behind you. We knew that it wasn't a war, it was just a ceasefire, but really we had no idea who was behind us, so it was a little scary.
I remember one time we were hit with mortars and I had to go out and repair lines to our platoons. And I saw a Korean houseboy coming up with my camera, which meant that my duffel bag in the rear had been broken into. I took it from him and then a shell came in and blew his head off. And I was very fortunate I wasn't standing that close to him. But as I was turning into my bunker, a shell came in and there was a guy standing alongside of me. He was wounded, knocked me on my ass. I wasn't hurt, thank God.
That's a very difficult question, my love, because as we were in outposts, we had to stop the enemy before it got to the company. They had to get past us before they got anywhere else. And that's when I got wounded in an ambush in hand-to-hand combat, and I lost my eye.
What were some of the most rewarding memories from your duties while in Korea?
What I remember most were little kids. When we got there were little kids and they were all dirty and hungry and begging for food. And by the time I left, a lot of those kids were cleaned up already and we had fed a lot of them. So it wasn't as bad. It was not as bad as when we first got there.
In my first night in Camp Cook, California, lights out at 10, some guy may have told a joke, I laughed. Him and I were put on a KP till 6 in the morning. I'll never forget that, Sergeant, because in Korea I went back for Passover services, and he was there. And none of us in my company had army cots. I had one when I left, put it in my sleeping bag, and I just hope he got charged for it.
That's a very easy question to answer. Being in the lines most of the time, you're not being very sanitary, and you got very little time to wash or bathe, let alone anything else. When we used to go to the rear, which was every 6 weeks, they would take us to where there's a little couple of, it wasn't showers. You stood up, they threw a pail of hot water on you, cold water actually. You wash yourself around, and they threw another pail of water so you can clean yourself. And the funniest thing of all is when we got to a river, we took off all our clothes and jumped in the river to wash. And one of the guys says, "My God, you got lip marks all over your body. I just got over the measles and didn't know I had them in the first place."
I had the Korean crud. I asked them, what is it? And they said, well, don't worry about it. Your clothes were washed in that river, and it was dirty water. It will go away. Don't worry about it. And they gave me some kind of black salve and white thin gloves to wear. And they said, do not. The best thing about it was I didn't do KP because they didn't trust me to go near the dishes, all the coffee pots and all that. So the Korean crud was pretty good for me. I stayed out of KP.
I developed tinnitus from the shelling, and today I'm wearing hearing aids because of it. And that's a ringing in the ears. And I never got over it. And to this day, a loud bang makes me jump.
Were you involved in any major battles, and were you wounded?
I was not involved in anything because I came in when there was ceasefire.
I was not involved in any major battle. It was just harassing fire from the Chinese.
6 campaigns. They were all major. I have no idea what names of them were. They gave us no names. They were just hills and places you were at. But they were all major battles. And I was hurt in 2 of them.
Did the war and your participation in it impact your life in any way when you returned home?
Yes, it impacted my life because I came home and I had no job or really an education. I didn't go to college. So what I did is got a job immediately, and then I went to Brooklyn College and under the GI Bill. So I was 4 days a week in Brooklyn College at night, and I worked 5.5 days in a store.
It didn't impact my life at all. I just let it go past me.
When I came home, it was like I was never. When I came home, it was like I was never even there. Outside of being 6 weeks in the hospital, when I came home in the Kwvyc Medical Center up in Bronx, New York, I was there for 6 weeks because they didn't know how to fix my eye. They tried and they did all kinds of things. They kept sending me around to different hospitals to try to correct it, and it couldn't. When I came out of that, I just went to work, and everything else is a bad memory. You just push it in the back of the head and you proceed. It was like it was something you can't possibly believe. I didn't believe it even then. I still don't believe it now. There's things that went on now you can't possibly describe. You'd think nobody would believe it. It's like a fairy tale, except it wasn't fun.
After you returned home from Korea, did you speak about your experience at all?
When I came home from Korea, every time I tried to speak to some of my friends or other people, they will look at you like you were either crazy or stupid. What were you doing over there? Why did you volunteer to a country that had nothing to do with us? And you just stopped talking about it because, I mean, you can't take the insults all the time. They kept giving you dirty looks and calling you stupid. That's exactly what it was.
When I came home, I didn't speak much about it really until I got married. And I told my wife my stories. And she could not believe some of them. Some of them were very amusing. And that's about it.
Never spoke about to anybody. There was nobody there to talk about it to. It was not considered a war, it was a police action. And they were there only to help the North Koreans, push the North Koreans back to where they came from. And nobody that I knew of was in the service where I was, so there was nobody to talk about it, and I didn't want to talk about it. In fact, the only time we start talking about it is right now in the last 4 or 5 years, when I go to the Veterans Center here, and we talk amongst ourselves, guys from World War II, from Vietnam and Korea. We can talk among ourselves because we're talking among our peers. And the only ones who can understand are the ones who went through it. Nobody else can possibly understand when we ourselves don't believe what happened.
Have you been back to Korea?
Yes, I've been back twice, once with my wife and once with my grandson. And now that Carson is involved with this group, I am hoping that she will experience the same thing that we all did.
I have no reason to go back, Coach. All I ever saw were hills, and more hills. Although I did go back one time to the 4066 MASH, which was the program. I went back for teeth x-rays and they didn't have any x-rays left. So I came back.
I will probably be going back there maybe next year with the honor committee. There's honor flights going to Korea, and I'll be scheduled for one probably next year.
The 2 trips that I took to Korea were sponsored by the South Korean government. This is a way of the Korean government rewarding the veterans that went there and did what they did for them. They're very successful now.
Have you any reason to go back? Have you any reason to go back?
Yes.
Well, you left something or you left your eye?
Well, what happens is I want to go back for 2 reasons. When I left there, it was just villages and towns and nothing but rubble. And we went there, we mainly had to go there to push the North Koreans out because they were raping and ravaging the South Koreans. I want to see what it's like now, being a metropolis that it became, just like Japan became a metropolis after they got bombed out in 1945 with the atom bomb, and they came back. I'd like to see how South Korea came back, because North Korea did not come back.
No. It's beautiful. It looks like New York. All big buildings and cars all over the place.
I was interviewed by a Korean newspaper, and it was very interesting, and they asked me if I would believe in the unification. I said, certainly, but not the way this Kim Il-sung is going. Their army gets fed well while his people are starving to death.
That's North Korea.
Yeah, North Korea.
Go.
What do you think is the legacy that is carried on by Korean War veterans and the Korean War?
That's the easiest question of all. Korea is the only country that we ever supported that gave us support back. All of Europe and all of Asia, who we helped, and we gave plenty of our lives, never appreciated it as much as the Koreans did. Till today, they're our biggest allies. They worked with us, they helped us, and when we fought, they fought side by side with us. Not like any of the other European countries who ignored us and still think we're nothing.
I could put my chest out with pride that I was there and I fought.
When I was in Korea, it was amazing how the people would, when they saw the veterans, Korean veterans, they would bow to us and they would shake our hands, they will thank us. And I say, what are you thanking us for? She says, look around and see those big buildings. You're the ones responsible for it. I said, well, you people did it yourselves. She said, no. We would have been like the other side of North Korea, nothing. You guys helped us so much, and we really love you and appreciate you.
In another 2 weeks, one of my friends is going on a troop ship. We're going to get the Legion of Honor from France, which is one of the highest honors. And we're going back now 68 years. He's first getting the Legion of Honor from what he did. The French government is giving it to him, which is a great thing considering they don't do anything.
Why do you believe the Korean War is considered a police action?
Because World War II had ended and 5 years later, North Korea started the war. And President Truman did not want to start again with the World War. People would not accept it, so he called it a police action. It was really not a police action, because if it was a lot of policemen that died immediately.
It was called a police action because the UN took over, and we were part of the UN. There were a number of countries involved. But as far as the police action was concerned, the first man killed in my division was 25 yards away from me. That was not a police action.
The Korean government asked us to help them because the North Koreans were invading the South Koreans. They weren't at war. It was just like a civil war here in the United States. There was two parts of their country being violated. Each one wanted possession of the other, except one of them could not fight back, and they asked for our help. But in that police action, if I may, in that police action that we had in Korea, 4,267 Americans were killed. 23,744 were wounded, and 227 were prisoners, all considered a police action and not a war. And it wasn't a war because it's not a world war. Every action since World War II has not been a war. It's been between their own people fighting against each other. Whether it's whether it's Vietnamese, whether it's the Gulf War, whether it's Afghanistan, Iraq, it's one nation fighting against their other, not different countries, individual fights between themselves. And unfortunately, we're involved in it.
Why do you believe that the Korean War is often referred to as the Forgotten War, and how do you believe it received that title?
It is called a forgotten war because nobody wants to talk about it, and it's never taught in the high schools. It should be taught, but they're not taught in the high schools. So the kids that are growing up now have no idea what it is, so it's like the forgotten war. Everybody forgot about it.
I agree with Mark. There was no hullabaloo, no welcome home parties, and it was just forgotten, swept under a rug.
It's a forgotten war because it wasn't a war. What happens between the individual states among themselves is not considered a war. So the United States is not considered a war, so it's a forgotten war. Just like Iraq, it's going to be a forgotten war. Afghanistan is going to be a forgotten war. Vietnam is a forgotten war. It's all forsaken. There's no wars outside of World War I and World War II. Those wars will never be forgotten. But we won't forget those wars, and we won't forget the people that died in them.
Loud.
Do you believe in the draft?
Yes, 100%. Half these people today that are doing half these kids today who don't want to go to school, they should be in the draft. Put them in service where they can learn discipline and how to obey orders, rather than just be running around the streets doing all kinds of stuff that they shouldn't be doing. Because they're idle, they're doing everything else but what's considered law-abiding.
Oh, yes, I definitely believe in the draft. It's an honor to serve your country.
Just because we didn't have a war here, that doesn't mean we're not going to have one. We should have a draft, and unless you go to college to do something, most of them should be drafted just like they do in other countries like Israel, where the male and females are drafted.
And 18.
Even after 60 years of armistice and a ceasefire, do you think there will ever be closure?
That is the easiest question to answer. Of all questions, it is easiest. When you're in a war and you lose people, you could never, ever forget. And as long as you can't forget, there'll always be hostilities, because you can't forgive the people who did that to your loved ones. No matter what it was, no matter what was involved, you can't forget. You can't bring it up, and you don't want to talk about it. You can't. You'll say you want to forget, but you'll never forget. You can never forget. It's in your memory. It'll be stamped in your memory for life. You can never ever talk about it, but you don't want to bring it up anymore because it only brings up bad memories. But the hostility will always be there. It'll be there between Israel and the Arabs. It'll be there between the Europeans and the Americans. Hostility will never end.
As long as you have the current government in North Korea, actually the war hasn't been over. And it'll never be over as long as you have this Kim Il-sung-un. The guy's a tyrant, and he's not interested in unifying.
As long as China and Russia back North Korea and gives him the weapons, and he's not too bright of a person anyway, he thinks he's a little kid playing with toys, not people. It will never be, as long as he's still running the country, it will never be peace.
If it were possible?
To support it is easy, knowing it'll happen. It'll never will.
I certainly would support it, but it's not going to happen.
It would be nice for the North and South to get together so some of the families could see each other after all these years, but I don't think...
As long as you have greedy governments, nothing can happen.
Yeah.
Do you think it is important for younger generations to understand and acknowledge the many sacrifices and contributions made during the Korean War?
That's good, Mark.
Yes, I do. It would be very helpful if it was taught to the younger generation. Up to now, they have not done that, and I hope in the near future they will do it so it's not a forgotten war.
Oh, I think it's important. I know my grandson, every Veterans Day, calls me up to congratulate me because I told him about it and he knows, but unfortunately, too many kids are not interested in this.
It is very hard for the veterans themselves to talk about it to their families because they themselves don't even understand it. We fought, we died, we lived through a hell of a lot of things, but we can't tell that to our children or our grandchildren. But it's up to the generation of teachers to come to teach that to our children. They're the only ones who could teach them and tell them what happened and show them in books and let them write essays because the people that are involved can't talk about it. The more you talk about it, the harder it is. It brings tears to your eyes and your heart shudders when you think of things you did that people wouldn't ordinarily do. You can't possibly be sane and be in a war. It's impossible. You do things that you would never think you could possibly do. I was 14 months in combat and still don't believe it. I saw a bullet twice. Once when it passed me, the second time when I passed it.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with us today?
As long as there's girls like yourself willing to find out and to experience what we went through our knowledge and pass it on to the rest of the youth, our jobs are half the work. Our jobs that we're done wouldn't be forsaken. It wouldn't be forgotten as long as you bring it forth to the others.
Very good. I agree. However, there has to be a little humor also. And I remember, first of all, how I got out from Korea. There were 100 guys eligible to be rotated, and they didn't have time to go back to United Personnel Service. And they had 100 slips of paper in an Army pipe, an Army helmet. 10 of them had numbers. I picked number 2. And I went home 2 months ahead of my time. That's a very fond memory.
I remember the first time I went to Korea with my wife, how the children would run for us and thank us and all that. The second time, 5 years later, I went back with my grandson and they assigned a high school girl to each one of us for a whole day, and they would ask us questions, and I was surprised at some of the questions they asked, like, is it true what they say that the Americans stole little children from the orphanage and took them back home. And I said, who told you that? Well, it's being taught in the schools. And I said, it is not true. And what else did they say? They said, well, they also mentioned that the Americans were not too nice either. And I told her, you're free because of those Americans. So this is the only thing that I got hurt listening to that girl, and I tried to straighten her out. By the way, she was coming to Columbia University for journalism. And those are the smart kids. So you can imagine somebody that's not smart, what they're learning there.
The fondest memory I have of this whole thing is coming home. Outside of the people who were wounded and died, we were the first troop ship home. And the people in the dock in San Francisco, the boats in the harbor were shooting water up in streams at us. And then we came marching off the boat. There was a Marine band and hundreds upon hundreds of people on the docks waiting for us. And as bad as we were, we marched off that boat like with our chest hanging high and tears in our eyes, because that brought back such a wonderful thing to see those people waiting for us. It was an honor.
No, I came home by plane, and I was standing with 1,000 men in formation, and at the corner of my eye, I spotted my mother, my father, my brother, my uncle, my aunt, come looking for a needle in a haystack. I saw them. I told the guy next to me, call my name when they call. And I ran and grabbed them. It was a great feeling.
I came from a country that we were not welcome, really. The Jewish people were not welcome. And I came to the United States, and I felt very proud to have served in the United States because this was my adopted country. And I really thank them for it. I volunteered, they didn't draft me, but that was my way of thanking a free country so somebody else could be free.
Yeah, we just keep going back to Korea. Is that where you want to go? This for us.
Right.
You're putting a story that we want you to put, and the rest of the young people like you that will remember and pass it on to other kids.
Nobody ever asked the 3 questions, ever.
That's because Sylvia won't let you answer.
We've been holding these answers for years and years. So it's great, especially like Marty and Heit. We've been holding back on those things.
My name's not Heit.
Oh,
His name is Joe.
Joe.
Now he does.
Heit.
You've been trying to forget that for years.
Thank you all for sharing this day with me and informing me of everything that you encountered along the way and along your journey and while you're in Korea. It was very special to hear. So now I would like to give you white roses because they symbolize reverence, and I think that was the best fitting color for today because you are heroes and you should be revered. So,
Sweetheart, I want you to have mine.
oh,
Because you are the sweetest thing.
thank you.
Now you maybe you got it.
I'm taking